You're listening to the Cinemental Podcast.
Shall we begin?
Okay, welcome back to the Cinemental Podcast, where we discuss mental health in cinema and television and how it is portrayed. What did they get right? What did they get wrong? And what do you need to know about mental health? I'm Jeffrey Jones. I'm a screenwriter as well as a professor of screenwriting, and I'm joined by my brother, a general and forensic psychiatrist, Dr. Josh Jones.
Hello, everybody.
Today, we're talking about the Popes Exorcist, based on the real Popes Exorcist, Father Amourth. This is a story about a priest exorcising a demon from a young boy and mentoring a new priest along the way. This was not a movie about the exorcism of the Pope, which the title sort of led me to believe. No popes were exorcised in the Popes Exorcist. Spoiler alert.
I love the term exorcising a demon, because every time I just picture like jazzercise and just doing some curls and getting swole. All right, folks. As always, the information expressed in this podcast is for educational, and that we use that term loosely. Educational and informational purposes only. Nothing expressed in this podcast is medical advice, and no doctor-patient relationship is created. If you or someone you know is suicidal or experiencing a severe mental health crisis, please call or text the National Suicide and Crisis Lifeline, number 888.
Thank you, Josh. And before we begin, I just want to briefly mention this week's sponsor. We have a new one, Arrowhead's new product, H2O Holy Water. H2 Holy Water. Refreshing and invigorating, H2 Holy Water comes pre-blessed. Enjoy that ice-cold flavor that burns like hell if you're a demon. Pick up a case of H2 Holy Water at your local grocer or participating Catholic churches. Okay, Josh, let's dive in. Let's start with the diagnosis. I'll let you take it away.
Okay. So Father Amourth, the main character, no psychiatric diagnosis, interestingly enough. But we are going to talk about demonic possession. And boy, that is where we get into a whole bunch of intersection between science and faith and what we don't know, right?
As soon as we talked about doing this podcast, this is what I wanted to talk about.
Right.
And I want to keep revisiting this like every fifth movie, because I'm so fascinated by the psychosis, or whatever you want to call it. You know, whatever drives people to feel like they might be possessed. Is it real? It's such a fascinating topic. So I'm so glad we're doing this one. So no diagnosis psychiatrically. In looking back, yes, I'll stick with that. In looking back at Silence of the Lambs, I have some clarifying questions about narcissism, because it feels like every priest who ends up being an exorcist is probably a narcissist.
I don't know. I honestly don't know. I've never actually done a psychiatric evaluation of one. Couldn't talk about it if I did. I don't know. I think you have to be really confident that what you're doing is going to be helpful. But
so there it is. There it is. Let me ask you the difference then between narcissism and just confidence, because we talk a lot about like where it becomes an issue is when it starts to affect somebody else's rights, or where it affects somebody else's ability to function. What is healthy narcissism? What is confidence? And the broader question I have for you is, don't narcissists run the world?
Well, again, so we have to make a distinction between narcissism, which is this ego state where where you believe you can do something, and narcissistic personality disorder, which is what we're really talking about. That's pathologic. And that's when somebody's ego, somebody's belief in themselves gets to such a point where it starts to override their willingness to, to let others express their own rights, and it really starts to impact their functioning in a wide variety of spheres, vocational, educational, interpersonal, etc. So that's the big difference, Jeff.
Great.
Everybody
that's
who's
great.
successful has a healthy, and we use that term loosely, healthy dose of narcissism. You have to believe you can do something, and you have to believe you can do something well in order to actually do it well. I mean, take us. We had a healthy dose of narcissism when we said, "Hey, let's do a podcast combining two of the things that we love," and we
People
think other
need
people
to
will love.
know what we know.
Right? Exactly.
Sure.
So, as you ask, do all priests have to have a healthy dose of narcissism? I don't know a ton about exorcism, but I have to think, if you believe you're going to be helping someone in dire need,
right.
whether you're a priest, whether you're a physician, whether you're a nurse, an EMT, whether you're a teacher, a professor, and you're going to help somebody else, you need to have a healthy dose of narcissism, of belief that you can do it. If you don't, you're not likely to be that successful.
Yeah,
but you
that
don't want it to
distinction-
get into that personality disorder.
Right. That's a really good distinction. That makes a lot more sense. Because I was thinking about like my days as an agent, where, and it's so easy for me to just think about things in terms of like harm. As an agent, it was my job to procure whatever job I could for my talent. Sometimes that meant taking a job away from somebody else. Sometimes that meant, I know that this person is hired here. I want that job for my client. I'm going to do whatever I can to get that job. And, that's hurting somebody else in a way. But it was part of the job, and it was a part of the job that I had no issue with. So in my mind, I was like, oh crap, do I have narcissistic personality disorder, or am I just, doing the best that I can for the clients that I have? You can tell me I don't have narcissistic personality disorder.
Sorry. That was my cue. Yeah, that was my cue. I mean, you're doing your job. You're doing your job.
Okay.
Father Amourth, as portrayed by Russell Crowe, he had a healthy dose of ego. He knew he was the best at this. Did that mean he was pathologic? It didn't come across that way.
Yeah.
Was he kind of a dick to the Vatican folks who were trying to provide him oversight?
Show respect to your superior.
I do! I am the chief exorcist of the Vatican. My position was appointed by my bishop. My local bishop is the Pope.
Yeah. But,
They were dicks to him, though.
Well,
For
sure. Yeah. That was an interesting scene.
Yeah.
Anyways, let's get into the movie, because I think we got to dispense with the. Let's talk about the movie, and then we can get into possession, right?
Great. Sounds good. Okay, so the scene, the movie opens with a really wonderful scene where Father Amourth is called to potentially exorcise someone who's exhibiting signs of exorcism.
Descrive l'inferno.
You will find out soon enough.
And he ends up convincing the demon inside the boy to enter into a pig, and then they shoot the pig, and now he's fine. Does this pass the smell check from either a psychological standpoint or a spiritual standpoint? Because it's good theater for Hollywood, but like, what were your thoughts on that scene?
Well, I'll obviously say I'm not an expert in the spiritual realm. I'm a psychiatrist, and this is where we have to draw very clear lines. Spiritual possession in all its many different forms is recognized by psychiatry as a potential culture-bound syndrome.
I did not know.
Yeah,
What does culture-bound syndrome mean?
So if it is very clear in a person's religion, culture, social sphere, that things that we Western folk, and of course I can only speak from my position as a white male physician, we Western folk would say that's not something we believe in, it's not necessarily considered pathologic. So if your spirituality tells you that it is okay and it is normal to be possessed by a demon, to talk in tongues, to do all sorts of things that, white bread might not think is totally kosher, it's not a disease. It's not pathologic. It's something that's cultural. It's something that's part of your culture. So we don't really know what to make of it. And there's lots of writing about, okay, is this an expression, are these possessions, is it an expression of dissociative identity disorder? Is it an expression of brief psychotic disorder? And I think that those are all attempts to marry two different nomenclatures or two different ways of describing distress that don't really fit. And so I've taken the stance, and I obviously think it's the appropriate one, that I just don't know. I just don't know. If someone brings their child to me and says, "Hey, I think this person is seeing visual hallucinations and auditory hallucinations," I'm going to do my best from the Western medicine psychiatric perspective to say, "Yep, let's look at this and diagnosis." If they come to me and they say, "Hey, I think my kid's possessed by a demon," unless there's a imminent danger to the kid or to somebody else, I'm not going to impose my belief system on them and say, "No, that's schizophrenia." Maybe it is, but it matters what they believe, and it matters the culture in which they grew up in, and it has actual, honest to God differences in how their distress is expressed. Does that make sense?
It does. It does. I guess here would be the question, and maybe you can't answer this. Let's say that a kid came to you and they believed this certain thing, and you're like, "I'm not going to impose my beliefs on you." You do what you can for them from a psychiatric standpoint. Like, they want to attack it both ways. That doesn't work. They have an exorcism, and the exorcism worked. Would you believe that they exorcised a demon, or would you believe that they released a psychosomatic, is that the right word? They had a psychosomatic experience that relieved them of the psychosis?
I would say, in all honesty, I'm very glad they got relief. I don't know why, and I don't know why, and I think that's something that we as physicians have to have the humility to understand, especially.
No, that's a great answer.
Having grown up in the Western in the Western culture, we have to have the humility to understand we don't know everything. We really don't know everything when it comes to the brain. And we have to have that humility to understand. Now, if there's severe danger, I mean, I've had lots of people who I've treated who thought that they were, who had delusions, fixed false beliefs that they couldn't be shaken. Interestingly enough, and I was thinking about this as we prep for this movie, I haven't seen a ton of patients who delusionally believed that they were possessed by a demon. Whoa.
I know. What was that?
Wild.
That was not staged, people. That was not staged.
Yeah, we could hear that, though. Clearly, yeah.
Yeah.
So I haven't had a whole lot of people believe that they're possessed by a demon. I've had a lot of delusions. Folks have delusions about things that are popular, and these delusions tend to come in waves. For instance, back in the 50s, 60s, and 70s, it was a very common delusion that the communists are coming to get me.
Right.
In the 90s and 2000s, the terrorists are coming to get me.
What is it? What is it when a voice tells them to do bad things? Because you've had
command auditory hallucinations.
Okay.
And
nobody's ever said it's the devil making them do it.
Sometimes, but less of a belief that they were possessed by a demon.
Gotcha.
It's happened a couple of times, but it's not as common as you think.
Yeah.
At least to come to the attention of a psychiatrist.
Yeah.
Let's go back to talking about the first kid.
Go back.
I thought it was great. So they did a great job with the development of Amourth's character in him saying, look, 99% of the time, not possession. It's a psychological issue. It's something that's going on, and I help them with that.
But the vast majority of the cases to which I am assigned do not require an exorcism. They just need a little conversation, a little understanding, and sometimes a little theater.
And they dropped a couple really nice, I thought, relatively subtle hints with that first case, where he asked, "Does he have access to TV?"
Right. That was a great
moment.
moment.
Oh yeah, to explain how he could all of a sudden speak English when he didn't before. I thought that that whole scene was very well done. Now, do I buy that he cured the kid by killing the pig? I mean, that was theatrical. That was a stunt,
right?
And I think that they even probably suggested in how they portrayed how Amourth approaches these things. He probably didn't just leave it at that. He probably also said, "Okay, now that he's done with possession, why don't you also go get him some psychological help?"
I wish they would have said that, though. I really wish they would have said that. I think that would have been more responsible, because it's such a Hollywood thing to be like, "Look at how awesome he is. He saved this kid." And it's like, it's just, even me watching it was like, there's no way it's that simple. This person clearly is going to need some psychiatric help or psychological help.
And it wasn't a consistent portrayal of how Amourth described how he approached things.
Right. Nor is it in the book, by the way. He, Father Amourth is very proud in the book of how he works in tandem with psychiatrists, which I can't help but think like, oh, this is a way that I can, look more legitimate than I am. But it is what it is. He also says he did like 6,000 exorcisms, and like if you just do the math, that's a couple a day. That's a lot. So he's got some grand tales. I choose to believe him because it's fascinating and interesting, but that's beside the point. Okay, so I'm glad we covered that. The kid was going to need more psychiatric help after that.
For sure, I think so.
Yeah. Okay.
All right. So then Amourth goes to the Vatican.
Yeah, he goes to the Vatican. We get that 98% of the time. I kick it up to a psychiatrist. And he makes a great point about free will. And this is something that he talks about in his book, so I'm glad they pulled it into the movie. But he's like, evil can only exist because of free will. God gave us free will. He expects us to use free will.
Only thing that arrests God's love is a person's freedom to choose. A God cannot be God unless he allows for this choice, even for the damned.
He's not going to interject, because ultimately, like, that's the important part of having life, is having free will. So I just love the fact that they pointed to that in the movie. He says something very interesting in his book about demons, because demons have free will. They were allowed to leave the side of God. And the reason why they're unsavable is because they saw God. They fully experienced God and then decided to abandon him. And so that's why, demons exist and they're unsavable. And so you have this battle between good and evil. That was a part of the book. I just found that incredibly fascinating. Okay, so then we're through that scene and we meet the future victims.
What do you think? Pretty cool, huh? Yeah, I know.
If anybody wants to give me an Abby, to will me an Abby, I'll take it. But they did that classic scene where they like roll up to this huge house and they're all like, "This one's a doozy." It's like, how thrilled would you be to get willed an Abby? A massive Abby.
I don't know, Jeff. I think I would feel pretty haunted, actually, right off the bat.
Would you actually?
Pretty haunted by the tax implications. Come on.
So stupid. That's a great joke. I just walked right into that one.
Just like they just walked right into the haunted abbey.
Imagine the property taxes on this haunted place. Wow. Okay. Okay. Well done, though. Well done. Yeah, and also, like, in real life, happy to get an Abbey. It might be haunted. It's all good. In movie, though, it's like, don't go down the stairs. Like, obviously, don't go into that house. It's obviously haunted. And when we watch movies, we're like, people need to make better decisions. In real life, if you're willed an Abbey, you're like, hell yeah. I don't care if there's ghosts. I want this huge, awesome Abbey. And then the kid is in the house, and this is where we first see some signs of this possession. The kid scratches his face. They go to get a brain scan. The brain scan comes back normal. Our brain scans, do they come back as normal for patients who need psychiatric help? Is that a real thing?
Yeah, really good question, because I get this a lot. And the blunt truth is, for the vast majority of psychiatric conditions, brain scans, whether it's a CT scan of the brain or an MRI of the brain, I think in this case they gave him an MRI of the brain, we use them to rule stuff out. And what that means is we use them to make sure that there's not been a stroke, there's not a tumor or other mass in the brain.
It might be a tumor.
It's not a tumor. It's not a tumor at all.
Otherwise, they cannot, or science is not at the sophistication or at the sophisticated level to be able to say, oh, there is a brain scan consistent with schizophrenia. There is a brain scan consistent with major depressive disorder. We're
Do you think
not
that's coming?
at that level. I don't know. I don't know. I think maybe in the realm of functional MRI, which means that it's actually looking at how different pockets of cells in the brain are metabolizing energy in real time. That probably has more promise than just a structural snapshot picture of the brain, because we really think that mental illnesses are dysfunctions in the networking of these cells and how they're processing information, and not necessarily a structural thing. In this case, for having him have a completely normal MRI, even if we suppose that he's having some mental illness as opposed to movie style possession, that does pass the sniff test. But I want to talk about the kid a little bit more, because even though this is a fantastical movie about demonic possession, and clearly later in the movie they violate lots of the laws of physics and all that kind of stuff, they actually do a really nice job of portraying a relatively underrepresented mental condition. So the kid was in a car accident that killed his dad, which is very, very, very traumatic. And then they say he stopped speaking. So he developed a condition called selective mutism, which is in the anxiety disorder realm, where usually kids who have previously had full vocabularies stop or severely limit their speech. They may speak in very constrained areas or spheres, and it's usually an anxious condition that they have, and it can follow trauma. They did a really nice job of portraying in this otherwise horror movie, psychiatric sequelae of trauma for this young boy, and I thought that was really sweet.
Yeah, because I don't know that it had anything to do with his possession. It was just something interesting about the boy, and they did a good job of portraying it. Which they did.
Yeah, they did it accurately. They didn't have to, and I thought it was, like I said, I thought it was sweet.
The inciting incident for the possession was the explosion. It was the workers working on the house, and then there was an explosion, and they talk about it later that the demon was released then. And that's what led to the possession. It wasn't that this boy was wounded and that he was, traumatized. So it didn't have to do with that, which is an interesting choice.
It is an interesting choice, yeah.
So they get wind that this kid might be possessed. They send out a note to Father Amourth. We need you to come and save this kid. And there's an amazing little montage of Father Amourth getting ready, and there's really dramatic music. And then they have him driving up in a Vespa. It's the most ridiculous thing. Good old Russell Crowe just had this tiny Vespa, just this bum 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 score, and it took me out of the movie for a second. Like, you couldn't have given him an SUV, there couldn't be like Pope's SUV. Like, you really got him cruising around in a Vespa. All right.
I thought it was fantastic. I thought it was great.
It's like our old Honda Spree.
Oh my God,
Remember
we
the
had
Honda
these two little red Honda Sprees and we were definitely not badass on these things.
No, I still have a scar. You can't see it, but there's a good scar here from when I tried to pop a wheelie. And just slid across the ground, and Dad just laughed at me.
Maybe these 1/4 horsepower.
That's so fun though. I
Anyways,
love those sprees.
That's what he was doing. I thought that was a great choice.
Yeah. Okay. So next he checks out the boy, and this is less your area and more the spiritual realm. But in going through Father Amourth's book, they do a pretty good job of expressing the ways that real life exorcists have seen demons present themselves. So the boy says things that he shouldn't know. He knows Amourth's name. A cross falls off the wall.
Whatever you do, you only do because God allows it. Did he allow that?
Things showing up in places that they shouldn't. And then this was an interesting one. He scratches his stomach, because a lot of exorcists will say that the pain will often manifest itself in the stomach, which I thought was really good. So clearly, they took a lot they did a lot of research, read his books. Whether or not any of that's true, I don't know, but it was at least consistent with Father Amourth and his real life experience. Anyway, okay, so then they find out the demon's name. This I thought was a little bit Hollywood. They need to.
It's all Hollywood. It's all Hollywood from there on out.
It really is, and we'll burn through the Hollywood part to get to some more psychological stuff. But so they need to find out his name. That's a piece of demonic possession and exorcism, according to Amourth. It's not a super important part, but for them it was like, we need one thing. We need our MacGuffin. So the movie's MacGuffin was, let's figure out his name. Yeah. So they end up down in the basement, and they dig a key out of the dead body, and Amourth smells something pretty bad. You're a doctor. You've had to go through residency. Have you ever experienced the stank of a dead body? Is this something that you've?
Of course. I mean, I did a medical examiner rotation at medical school. We did lots of autopsies. They can get pretty rank. Now, this dead body was centuries old.
Sure.
There's no gas left. There's no gas left to that thing.
Yeah. You told me a story once about you were right at somebody's base of their crotch.
Oh yeah. Yep. And they lifted up poor fella who died. He was on his back, and I had to do the external view, and I lifted up his scrotum and just hit by a pungent blast of body odor. And that's what happens to us all, though. I mean, that's what happens to us all.
Yeah, I remember I was still at the age where I delighted in your misery. And for 2 weeks after or something, every time you smelled a fart, you threw up, and I was like, oh, I gotta eat me some beans. Anyway, I apologize for that time of my life. Yeah, and then they start performing the exorcism on the boy. They do the typical Hollywood thing, and there were a lot of tropes in this movie. Where the daughter turns into a spider monster and climbs the walls and the ceilings. And that was one of my just biggest issue with this movie, and a lot of movies in general, is that movies end up being very derivative. The Exorcist came along, really changed the genre. But then every demonic movie or exorcist movie since then has just been borrowing scenes directly from the exorcism. You see this a lot in cop dramas, where they'll just pull their information about the way that police work from previous cop dramas and not actually talk to cops. And for this being such a subject matter that has a wealth of information available, it was a fault to me of the filmmakers a little bit that they used so many derivative derivative things to tell the story. I don't know if you want to say anything about that, but that was one of my feelings towards the end.
I liked it. I'm not a big horror movie guy. It got way off the beaten path of psychiatric issues pretty quickly, and then I thought it was a pretty serviceable horror movie. They had some tropes that were well worn. I didn't mind it, and I loved Russell Crowe. Just he did not mail this one in. He brought it for this whole thing, and I loved that. I thought that was great.
So you were entertained?
Are you not entertained?
Oh,
you were entertained.
I was. Anyway, so
okay.
you thought it got derivative, and then
I thought it got derivative, and I
gets to the end.
And I want to make one last point about storytelling, because I know this is a lot about psychology, but like me as a storyteller, I want to point these things out sometimes. Okay, so in any movie, and this is again where I felt like the movie fell a little bit short. In any movie, change needs to happen. There has to be some kind of character who goes through change, and it's very clear from the beginning that Father Amourth's character already believes what he needs to believe to get through to the end of the movie. He's not going to make any change. And so the change needs to happen from the other young priest. And you want the change to be as counter to who the person's going to be as possible. So you think about something like Breaking Bad, chemistry teacher, meth dealer, as polar opposite as you can get. So anytime you have a movie about priests, the opposite of a belief in God would be losing your faith in God.
Okay.
Hence The Exorcist.
Okay.
So that's been done. Can't necessarily do that. So in this movie, Amourth gets possessed, and so this young priest has to step up and, depossess, has to exorcise Russell Crowe. The change needed to be about his ability to feel like he can do that. He needs to not have the confidence to do that. So his sin should have been something that made him not confident in his abilities, and then he gets over that to save the day. So don't give me those closed eyes. This is good.
No,
this is good entertainment.
This is
stuff.
good. This is hot Ted. I have a question for you about this though.
Yeah.
In this storytelling, should they have done?
You're about to make fun of me. I can tell. Because I see your face is giving you away. Your smile gives you away.
Should they have done a training to do an exorcism montage?
Yes. Yes. Everybody needs a montage.
Okay.
Anyway,
all right.
That's my sort of lesson of the day about how to tell a good story. Change has to happen. Young priest should have been the one that did it. So anyway, they exercise covered in blood. Great scene. He's covered in blood. And Russell Crowe's just Russell Crowe. You don't need to add any makeup to him. He's just a badass. And then they go back. The one priest is elevated to cardinal. Great job. And then they learn that there's 199 other unholy sites, and their men are on a mission. And now it's sequel time.
Yep. And the only thing I could hear as soon as they said that was 199 big bad demons on the wall. 199 big bad demons. Sure.
I like it. I don't think that there will be a sequel to this movie. I don't think it was particularly all that well received. We will see. I would love to see Russell Crowe continue to exercise things, possibly himself. So good. That was for the most part. That was the Pope's Exorcist. Josh, you want to give a grade for the movie in terms of portrayal?
Yeah, I liked it. I'm just going to give it a big old thumbs up as an entertaining movie, and they did a nice job of portraying some trauma and selective mutism in the kid when they didn't need to be that good at it, but they were, and I appreciate that.
All right, cool. For me, I give this. I think that the writers need to do 3 Hail Marys, and then they'll be okay. So I'm going to give this 3 Hail Marys. Okay, so next week, we're going back into the film archives and talking about one that's pretty obviously has some psychological issues in it, and we're gonna do Fight Club. Oh crud! I talked about it.
No, yeah,
Dang
you
it.
can't talk about it.
I broke the first 2 rules. Mm-hmm. Oof. Okay.
All right, so Fight Club's next week.
Yeah, so we're doing Fight Club. Cool. Okay, so yeah, that's basically it for us. Thank you for watching or listening to Cinemental and our coverage of the Popes Exorcist. Subscribe and hit the notification icon. If you're on YouTube, you can follow us on any of the major podcasting platforms. And we're also on Patreon. And please note that 100% of the proceeds raised on Patreon are going to be donated to 988 call centers. We're not trying to make any money with that. We just want to raise some money for a cause that we think is pretty great. Yeah, so with that, for Josh Jones, I'm Jeff Jones. Thanks again for listening, and we'll see you next week for Fight Club.
Take care, everyone.